Episode 6, We Take a Zebra to Vegas, I think is how they phrase the title of this one specifically, is an interesting beast. It changes a lot from the book, but it does so, I think, to the benefit of the story. Maybe less so than some of the other areas, but it's still good. It's still solid. And I certainly like a lot of what they did here to add stuff to some of the characters. It takes what in the book was, at least to my recollection, at least what stood out in my mind as the moment where Percy and Annabeth really bonded, and instead kind of glosses over it and uses that sequence for comedy, which is fine. It's a pretty funny sequence when Grover realizes that the truck that Ares put them on to take them to Vegas is actually illegally transporting a bunch of animals. And so he, as a satyr and a protector of nature, lets them loose in Las Vegas. It was pretty, that was pretty funny. It was pretty funny in the book too, but the way they just kind of basically jump cut to it here made it even funnier. But it does mean sacrificing the entirety of the kids' time on the transport truck, the zoo transport truck, save for a scene that we get here of them using a prism to create a rainbow to send an iris message, something also from the book, back to camp, and having a brief conversation with Luke entirely by accident, ending up kind of updating Luke on their quest when they meant to update Chiron, which ends up being important later. That is a thing that did not happen on the truck in the book. It happened at a car wash, wasn't it? They used the water sprayer from a car wash to make a rainbow. I think that's right. And I'm glad that they worked that in here, that they rolled that into another scene and were able to get in here by doing so. It does mean, again, sacrificing what that scene was in the book, but the character bonding between Percy and Annabeth has felt so much more substantial elsewhere in this version of the story that the loss isn't really significant. I just really like this scene and would have liked to have seen aspects of it in the show that we didn't end up getting to see in the show. A little bit of a bummer. But they do make it to Vegas on the truck with supplies from Ares to help them on the rest of their way. And they end up at the Lotus Casino, which in this version they are smart enough to realize if it has anything to do with their world will be the Lotus Eaters, which means if they eat the food here, they could be trapped and lose their memories. And like God, even I had heard of the Lotus Eaters when I read the book. Like I knew what this was immediately, and then the kids get stuck here. And I'm like, come on, guys. So I like that they went into this knowing the story, and they end up just getting trapped and tricked a little bit by the new way, the modern way that the story is being played out, instead of just being completely blindsided by it 100%. I also mentioned in the previous review that they're here to see Hermes specifically. He comes here to gamble. And they do. They bump into Hermes. And I like him. I like him here. I think he's good. He's played by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who I don't like everything he does. I don't like all of his roles, but he's solid here. He has kind of a dopey, sad man look. Like, no offense to the guy, but he has kind of a dopey, sad man look to him. Especially when he really accentuates it. And that is something that works for the Percy Jackson version of Hermes. So it works out well enough. And this is where we start to get more of Luke's backstory, building up towards something that will come later. We find out that Luke's mom was someone who could see through the mist. She could see what's really there. Something that Percy eventually realizes is true of his mom too. But specifically, she was so good at seeing things that she could see the future. She was a potential oracle. And for whatever reason, this caused her to go insane. We find out there's more to it later on than just like, oh, the magical world made her crazy. But that's kind of how it seems. And Hermes just, like, from Luke's perspective, didn't do anything about it. And then he just kind of buggered off. And we get here that the reason he did that is because he, for whatever reason, we don't know specifically why yet, we won't find that out until later, feels like that his presence in the lives of Luke and his mother made things worse. And that specifically Poseidon advised him that that might be the case, and so he stepped back. And said that even that is a kind of parenting. Knowing when to step back, and that's actually true. That's a very good point. And so they give us just enough. They give us just enough snippets here. Stuff that Annabeth would have already known anyway, so like we could have gotten the exposition from her at any time in either version. Just enough to kind of lay the groundwork for what we're going to learn about Luke later, explaining some of his future choices. Hermes doesn't agree to help them get where they need to go because he thinks it's pointless and is kind of a jerk about it, but the scene's otherwise really good. And we also get a subplot for Grover here. In the books, Grover's dream was always to be a searcher. We've gotten references to searchers throughout the show. They're satyrs who go out looking for the dead god Pan, who they believe is not actually dead, so that he can come and help restore the wild. And in the book, Grover's dream is to become a searcher, to get his license and become a searcher. And we actually have a mention of the searcher's license here finally in this episode. I'm starting to think show Grover that's not his dream yet, and we're seeing the genesis of it. Because I'll spoil something from the books. Grover is the one who eventually does find Pan. He's the one who does it. After millennia of failures. And I think what they're doing here is they're giving Grover a reason to think that he might be the one to finally do it. So he gets this little plot line where he starts to lose his memories. They do a let's split up and search for clues moment where Percy and Annabeth go one way and Grover goes the other way, and he starts to be affected by the Lotus Eater's Lotus magic, even though he hasn't eaten any Lotus flowers, because they just pump them into the air now inside the casino. And also, in an extra nefarious twist, time moves faster here. So even though they've only been in the building for like 20 minutes, the time they had for the quest is basically gone. And again, we get another scene here in the book that I did like. I'm kind of sad it's not here. In the book, they manage to escape because it's Percy who shakes loose the grog of the lotuses and gets the other two out, and they use the casino debit card that they were given to buy food and games during their stay to pay a cab to take them the rest of the way. And I do like that scene because I thought that was a clever way of getting them the rest of the distance. But instead, in this version, they just use Hermes' own car. They steal it. He lets them steal it. But they steal it and drive it themselves. And once it's on the road, and therefore within the sphere of the God of Travelers, it will take them anywhere they want to go. So we get this really funny scene of Percy trying to drive a car out of a garage and failing miserably for the most part, and almost getting them killed because he keeps looking over at Annabeth, and it's very cute. It's a very cute scene. In fact, I'll talk in a minute about that, but the best part of this episode is Percy and Annabeth. But he does get them to the road, and then the car teleports them directly to Santa Monica Pier, which is where they're trying to get to in this version specifically because Poseidon will be there to speak to Percy. But by the time they get there in this version, the deadline is already passed. They're too late. And Poseidon has had to go to marshal his forces because he's about to go to war. And so he's not there. He leaves the Nereid behind to tell Percy what happened. And that gives Percy the opportunity to say, no, we're still doing this. It's the right thing to do. We're going to see this through and do everything we can to try to stop this from getting any worse than it already is. which just feels so much more impactful when the deadline's already passed. The quest is already technically over. So we get this additional moment of Percy saying, screw that, screw the way things are done, that's wrong, we're going to do it the right way. And I love that. It's so good. Changing the way the time scale within the casino works so that they end up actually late to the conclusion of this quest not only ramps up the tension, but it opens that door to that moment. And I think it's a great change overall. It makes this a little less cookie cutter too. Like, they aren't just, it doesn't feel like they're just playing out a story. It feels like the characters are actually living this journey, if that makes sense. In the book, the fact that there is the deadline and they do basically meet the deadline, it kind of felt like the ending of the story, save for some specific details, was already laid out for them from the very start. Here it doesn't feel that way. And I think that works better for the story overall. They also kind of changed the way the Lotus Casino works a little bit, because Percy and Annabeth were together. They weren't alone. They each had somebody. They aren't as affected by the Lotus Flower Mist as Grover is. And so we don't get exactly the same sequence of events for them either that happened in the book. Like, Percy doesn't zone out and play video games for like untold hours or whatever. But I like this too. It gives them chances to interact. And the young actors are so good here. It's hard to put your finger on it exactly. Like in the previous episode, Annabeth finally used Seaweed Brain, which is her. It starts out as an insult, but it becomes kind of her pet name for Percy. And she uses it again in this episode, and he uses Wise Girl for the first time here. And is genuinely shocked. Like, he looks to her for the answer to something at one point, and is genuinely shocked when she doesn't know. And it's hard to put your finger on exactly why all of that adds up to their relationship feeling completely different. But it does, and the actors do such a good job of conveying it. They feel like they've been friends for forever at this point. Like, they are just inextricably linked. And that's Percy and Annabeth. And it's so cute. And it's so nice to see that dynamic play out so perfectly in live action like this. It's just that it's them. They're there in front of you. And as a huge fan of the books, and specifically their relationship in the books, I couldn't be happier. Like, I think this was maybe overall the weakest episode of the show so far. But this dynamic and the stuff with Grover seemingly having that inspiration to be the one to find Pan makes up for it. They do make one change, though, that I'm really curious now where they're going with it. At the end, Percy implores the Nereid to help if she can, because he's going to go through with this. And she's like, "You're so much like your father," and he gives him a handful of pearls. In the book, the pearls were like, it was always Poseidon's plan to give them the pearls here with through a Nereid. And there was 3 of them, one for each of the questers. And with the understanding that what comes from the sea can return to the sea. Basically saying they can use the pearls to escape the underworld and come back to this spot. But because there's only 3 of them, they aren't able to all leave, all 3 of them and Percy's mother. And that feels like an oversight on Poseidon's part. But you could explain it away by saying, like, maybe he couldn't bear to assume that she was actually still alive. Or maybe he knew something about their quest that they didn't yet, because that does end up being important to their quest. Here, though, the Nereid gives Percy 4 pearls, and specifically says that one is for his mother. Which means that they're going to go into the underworld with a plan to get Sally Jackson out. And I cannot stress enough that it is important to the story of this book that they do not leave the underworld with Sally Jackson. So I don't know how they're going to handle that. It's a little weird. It's the one change in this show so far that I'm not really sure what they were thinking when they made it. But I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, because aside from the occasional logical hiccup that was no more logical hiccup than the equivalent logical hiccup in the book was, the changes in this show have been solid. I'm going to be watching this one. It's interesting. That said, what do you guys think of the 6th episode of Percy Jackson and the Olympians? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else if you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out the links to my various social medias, as well as the link where you can purchase the first 3 of my novels, which are available for sale now. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.